if we have a fair system, we will ensure that good cops remain cops and bad cops are removed.
Yeah.
The captain looked at me and said, "We're LAPD. We don't need a constitution."
Welcome back to the IA Guy, a police podcast, here with your host, Marlon Marrache. And today, another special guest. But before we bring her on, I got to tell you, we have a debater. She was part of her high school debate team that landed her a job, or a function, I should say, in LAPD that she had absolutely no clue that ever existed. So, Ninette, man, thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, Code
So happy
6.
to be here.
Yeah, you know what? You and I have been talking quite some time about trying to get you in here. I've been kind of been chasing you down because I realized that I know at one point you made a comment about you work in officer rep section. Is that correct?
That's right.
And not many of us work ORS. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
Would it be fair to say that you probably didn't know what ORS was?
I had no idea there was such a unit. I mean, seriously. I never thought as a cop that I would be
Defending
fulfilling-
cops.
Yeah, fulfilling a role like that, defending officers.
Yeah. But you know what? Before we get into all that, what I do know is, look, you have done 24 years and change of a career in LAPD, and I know a lot of that has to do with investigations. You were a detective for quite a long time. So I'd like to ask you right off the bat, if you were in a room full of sergeants that are getting ready to begin their tour in internal affairs as an IO, as an investigating officer, what's the one thing you want them to know about that job?
I would tell them, as I would tell anybody in an investigative position, which is have an open mind. I think that, you know, as cops, we're taught on the street to make decisions real quickly, and we have to because it's sometimes life and death. But in investigations, you have time. And so instead of jumping to conclusions, even if there is evidence that may point a certain way, to obviously consider the evidence. I'm not saying ignore it, but at the same time, still have an open mind to continue to look for more information.
It sounds like you're speaking from experience where you've probably seen investigations have some bias, if you will.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen biases, you know, within IA, and I've seen it, you know, in detective work, and I have been guilty of it myself. You know, I can think of a specific case that I was just floored because I was hell-bent thinking this was the guy.
Right.
And then evidence came to light, and it turned out he was not.
Yes, yes. I can only imagine working these violent crimes where you're after these suspects, and you know, you're sitting here turning every single stone, and you're just like, no, that's not the one, you know. And I can see that from the public's lens, right? The fact that you do want to take someone, you know, a predator, you know, from the streets, right? It's public safety, but within that kind of sucks. And you've had your dealings with IA, but again, before we get into that, let me ask you this. Why do you think internal affairs has such a negative stigma? It probably definitely had a bad negative stigma in 1994.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are in 2025, and I still talk to a lot of my colleagues, or, you know, you go on social media. I know that this is not just in the city of Los Angeles. This is just nationwide. Why do you think that IA is such an evil entity?
Well, I mean, IA is not an evil entity, but I think that the reason for the perception is that there is a general feeling that the process is not fair and it's not objective. And so I think that that's really the root for that sentiment and that opinion of IA, that there are other motives within the organization or political or whatnot. And so there's a lack of faith and trust in the process.
Do you think that the process sometimes is the penalty?
It can be. It can be, because I have seen particularly during the Rampart era, where you had these boards and these investigations that were so prolonged because there were so many that the timelines couldn't be met. And so you had people who were sent home sitting for over a year, not knowing their fate. And that in and of itself, I mean, think about what that does psychologically to somebody.
Yeah.
You know?
And that was, well, let me set it up for you. So this must have happened, the Rampart Scandal, what, 1997, 1998?
Yes.
Here you are as a young police officer, and you're at Rampart.
Yes.
And Chief Parks became the chief of police in 1997.
Right.
And post Rampart Scandal, he said, you know what? There's no way that these officers didn't cut corners or didn't commit misconduct. So therefore, you know what? I'm going to send about 70 plus to this hearing. And you've heard me talk about this, the border rights hearing. It's like a trial, if you will.
And tribunal.
Right, it's tribunal. You're asking defense reps to be like these glorified attorneys, and you're asking these sergeants in internal affairs to be prosecuting attorneys. Would that be fair to describe?
Absolutely. As a defense rep, you're essentially a defense attorney, and the sergeant from IA is essentially the prosecutor.
And little did you know that your debating skills was going to land you some representation. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
That's actually a really funny story because I was a really brand new green P2.
Okay.
I mean, I had barely gotten off probation. And the whole scandal happens, and everybody's freaking out at Rampart, and people are getting sent to boards left and right. And for me, you know, being so rookie-ish, really, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what's going on? And a sergeant approached me, and he goes, "Hey, yo, Toos, so I hear, like, you did debate in college?" And, you know, you could hear he was really skeptical about, like, what does that even mean? But somebody had told him, you may want to hit up Toos because she did something that's kind of related to, like, a tribunal or a trial. And I said, yes, sir, why? And he says, well, I really need a defense rep. And they're all booked up at ORS, and I need a rep. Like, do you think you'd feel comfortable repping me? I didn't even know what that meant, but I like a challenge, and I'm always curious, like, really, what is this? And he goes, well, and then he kind of explains what it is, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's like right up my alley. And he goes, all right, well, I'll give you my case, review it, and then tell me whether you think you can win it. And I go, okay. So the following day, on my day off, I'm reading it, I'm going through it, and I go right back into my debate mode, and I was like, oh, there's where I missed that one, and I'm like starting, and I'm going, I can win this case. So I go back to work, and I say, hey, Sarge, I can totally beat this case. And he looked at me, and I think my confidence made him go, is she blowing smoke up where the sun don't shine? He's like, how could this, young P2 be so confident, right? Because, of course, he was really nervous, and he's had prior experiences with IA and so forth. So I had a naivete where I thought, yeah, we'll win this. And he, of course, had a more cynical view because, he had like 15, 16, 17 years on the job.
Yeah, they're out to get me.
Anyway, to make a really long story short, we go to the board. And I'm learning how to, pick the board member. It's all new to me. Mm-hmm. It was a steep learning curve. We go to the board, and we win. And I mean, I think he was more surprised than, wow. But I mean, the board throughout the days, I was like, look, we're winning. Can you tell? And he's like, yeah, but, you know. Anyway, we won the case. Once when he got back to the station and said that he'd won this case, when all these other boards were not going well.
Right.
Suddenly, my door, people were knocking on my door. All these coppers like, hey, you want to be my defense rep? You want to be my defense rep? And so it got to the point where at one point I was holding multiple boards. And so finally, the commanding officer at Rampart was like, look, you're never, like, you need to just go to ORS.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up at ORS.
As you sit here today reflecting on the win of this border rights hearing, how did that make you feel?
It was such a satisfying feeling because I felt like I had really helped this off as a sergeant, but copper, right? We're all coppers. I'd really helped this cop who clearly had not done what he was accused of doing, right? So I cleared him. I saved his career, and it was the same kind of satisfaction as when you save somebody out on the street or you help a victim, a member of the public. But it was even more meaningful because he was part of my tribe,
Yeah.
because he was a cop, right? And then when I went on and did many other boards, and I did a board of a probationer who was looking at getting terminated for false and misleading after a hit and run. And, you know, he had panicked. He's not a bad kid.
Right.
And everybody was like, he's going to get fired because it was false and misleading. Back then, that was an automatic, you're getting fired,
Yeah.
right? So we're going to the board, and he was a Marine, right? He was a former Marine. And I thought, well, I can't beat it on the facts. I mean, he lied, right?
Got
It's on the 911 tape. It's like, it's all over the place,
Right.
right?
So it's factual.
It's factual.
It's going to be sustained.
It's going to be sustained.
Got it.
So what I did is I brought in half the Marine Corps. And I'll never forget, we were on the 3rd story at Bradbury Building, and there was just a lineup of Marines in uniform of like almost every rank you could think of. And the advocate's office, right, IA was like, what the heck is going on here? And I go, just stand by to stand by, right? And so they came in as character witnesses. Yeah. And the board just sat there, and they were like, and the chairman of the board, kudos to him, captain, his rationale was, yes, you lied. I don't think it's a reflection of poor character. It's not that you're not worthy of this job. You're young, you're inexperienced, and you panicked. Let this be a learning lesson for you, but we're going to give you 60 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saved this kid's job to this day, and this is like, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Proud of it.
Yeah, Ninette, when I sit here, I think about, as you're telling the story, when I worked ORS as well, and I did an admin appeal hearing, and just to know that they overturned the decisions by Internal Affairs, it feels good from the standpoint that, you know what, we shouldn't have even been here in the first place.
Right.
It's these decision makings through these levels of review that makes you feel like, all right, come on, maybe someone took it personal, maybe it's self-serving, and that's not the way it should be. Now, I was on the other side of the table as an advocate, in internal affairs. One of 5 cases that I did was a false statement where they found him guilty and they lied, and he got, the accused employee got terminated. But it wasn't, it's a whole different emotion. It's not one where you go, it's more of, and for me, it was difficult to manage and cope with my emotions because I'm very energetic. I love to laugh, and I have this witty personality, if you will, and there is nothing witty and there's nothing fun about being in the 5th floor at Bradbury Building. I mean, they call it the oven, man. It's hot. Yeah. And so for me, it was an eye opener. But you know what? If anything, I got so much growth out of, for the most part, things that you shouldn't. Yeah, absolutely.
Learned so much.
Would you agree with me when it comes to just police work in general? It's not so much of what you did. It's probably the things that you could have done or that you didn't do at the scene or at the incident, so on and so forth, where the department kind of, pokes at you, and start passing a little judgment and provide you some scrutiny.
For cutting corners, you mean?
Yeah, for cutting corners, or here's this critical incident, in custody death. We call it LARI, law enforcement related injury, which is basically an incident where the suspect ends up hospitalized, right? So now you got to do a full-blown critical incident, and of course OIS is being the most popular. But when it comes to tactics, if you will, it's not what you actually applied. It's the things that you know what? You didn't do this.
Yeah. And
you didn't do that, and perhaps you could have thought about doing this. Those are the kind of things that I'm realizing, after, doing this podcasting for a year and having all these guests and teaching, that it's okay to be critical, but we shouldn't drop the hammer when we find someone that's lying for an innocent mistake and you panicked and, we gave you suspension and lessons learned.
Well, it's all about context, right? And I think the problem with that era of the false and misleading and, with everything that happened with the Rampart Scandal is that the pendulum swung in such a dramatic way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's very typical for organizations, not just LAPD, to overreact when something goes wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this overreaction was like, all right, everything is draconian. Like everything is letter of the law, no spirit of the law. You false and mislead, you're out. Without looking contextually, are there false and misleading? I mean, is that a problem? Yes.
Yeah.
Our integrity and our authenticity and our honesty is critical for what we do as a living. So absolutely, I'm not challenging that. But what I am saying is that we should look on case-to-case basis and look at the total context to determine whether or not this individual is deserving of carrying that badge, right? Of wearing that badge. And that was lost during that era. And so going back to the question that you initially asked me is, you know, why is there this hatred of IA? Why is there a sense of distrust? Well, I think it comes on the heels of these types of practices.
Yes.
And that, you know, and
Very well
perception
said.
becomes reality, you know? Perception becomes reality. And so the perception is that, all right, you're not really interested in fairness. You're not really interested in understanding why I made the mistake, you know. And again, you know, there are errors of the heart and there's errors of the mind. And then sometimes there's just errors that you didn't realize was an error, right? But it all should be examined. I mean, that's part of, I feel, the investigative process.
Absolutely. Which leads me to ask before I forget, do you think the job of an internal affairs investigator is to protect cops?
No, it's not to protect cops. It's to get to the truth and, in that sense, protect public trust in law enforcement. Because if we have a fair system, we will ensure that good cops remain cops and bad cops are removed.
Yes.
That should be the function of IA.
100%. I think the entity you should hold accountable for this negative stigma, it's probably the chain of command, probably the levels of review. I don't think it's so much an investigator, to be quite honest. I've worked internal affairs with some awesome IOs, people who really do investigate and turn every single stone. I think where in my experience, where it starts to detour a little bit from this process. I mean, for me, I think protecting would be the process, and we forget about that.
I agree.
I think we forget about that. And me personally, and people have different opinions, I think there's just way too many levels of review. Meaning, you know, here you have this two captains at the division. Okay, well, you know, we're gonna unfound these allegations. But then you got to go to bureau, and here you have this commander and this deputy chief. Nah, you know what? No, we feel that it's going to be sustained. It happens, so you're going to have to change your mind. What we call a military endorsement, right? So, and then of course, if the two captains, you know, with all due respect, had any spine, they would say, you know what? We're good with our decision. If you want to change it, you're more than welcome to endorse that and change it from unfounded to sustained.
Right.
And then you got to go to the internal affairs where there's another deputy chief and another commander. And they're also examining and they're thinking, well, let's just say, well, this shouldn't be sustained. This should be unfounded. So and guess what? Now someone's got to go to the chief's office and sell this investigation. So my point is that you have all these hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah, too many.
One too many. And then the other
But
thing.
you know why?
What do you think?
I think part of the problem, and it's not just internal affairs. I think it's a lot of the management structure on LAPD, at least while I was there. I don't know about changes since I've left, is that the organization doesn't trust its leaders. Okay, so if you make somebody a sergeant, and a sergeant can't make certain decisions out in the field today as he or she could years ago, now you got to take it to a lieutenant. And then, before you know it, now you got to take it to a captain. Well, then why are you promoting people to sergeant if you don't trust the sergeant to make the right decision at a field level?
I agree.
And so this is just another example of that. You make two people captains, you would presume, because now they're at the executive level, that the organization should trust them and know their people. And so you should trust their decision. But when you then have to go through this whole bureau and internal affairs and all the way up to the chief, it suggests to me that the organization from the top level, really what they're saying is, we don't trust your decision making.
Yeah, I agree. Good point. You know, you should just, hey, whatever decisions you make, I'm going to back you. and call it a day. It just so happens that this is the funky, I guess that's a buzzword I could use. It's kind of funky when you can relate to this. You pick this Board of Rights from this wooden box and these chips come out.
I remember.
And you're like, and then he's good, right? And like, no, don't pick her, don't pick him. But let's just say, hypothetically, you pick like two newly promoted captains. And you have introduced all this evidence for them to examine. You have brought in all these witnesses for them to listen. I mean, for them to watch and listen to this testimony. And 100% this is going to be not guilty, and, here see these two promoted captains are probably thinking, well, if we go against the chief, because I always found that kind of weird. Hey, Ninette, I'm going to send you to this board, no different than the scandal. Everybody here is lying because there was a scandal. So I'm going to send you to this hearing, and your fate lies on these 3 board members. However, I'm recommending removal. Like, I want you fired, but I'm going to leave it up to them. Don't you think that's kind of...
It's not kind of anything. It's a complete conflict of interest. And frankly, I think that, I feel that to some extent, like that should be done outside of the agency, that we should have independent, completely, there's no dog in the fight. For some of these captains, there's a dog in the fight, and it's their own career. And look, we're human beings. I'm not necessarily blaming these captains. I mean, I don't endorse it, I don't condone it, but I also understand humans are humans. And I have had personal experiences while a rep where there were captains who got punished for defying what the chief really wanted, the outcome at a board. And I will even share this, which I have never shared in a public open forum, but I had a civilian board member who approached me after the board where they had terminated the officer and said, "Officer, there was so much inappropriate discussions that I witnessed between these 2 captains, and they basically had already written their rationale before the entire board had been presented. And when I told them, because I am an attorney," she said, "that is a violation of due process and it is unconstitutional," the captain looked at me and said, "We're LAPD, we don't need a constitution."
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that, to me, was such an eye-opener.
Yeah, ex parte. It happens. It happens.
Yeah.
The saddest part about what you just shared is that it probably still happens. We can sit here and talk about and share these stories about these border rights hearings, about these admin appeal hearings, about these skellies, right? These responses. And it's sad to say that it's 2025 and it's probably still happening. And by the way, it's not just my beloved LAPD. It's happening everywhere. More reasons to have a police podcast and have these discussions. Because if we are going to change, and the reasons why I ask all these questions is because how do we change, right? How do we get rid of that negative stigma? And it's my true belief that having these conversations, will make a dent.
Well, if nothing else, bring awareness. I mean, when I look at our system, and our system is slightly unique from other police agencies, but, I worked for USC after I retired from LAPD, and I was an investigator for them because, as probably most people in Los Angeles know, that there was a bunch of scandals, and so USC wanted to get in a team of investigators to start looking at these internal investigations. And, in the private sector, if you've got serious issues, serious misconduct or an investigation, and it goes outside of HR, a lot of these disputes are then handled through litigation, which is unfortunate, but that's how they do it. But one of the things that occurred to me as I sat as a witness for many depositions is that when you have an arbiter, right, in a deposition, and then you've got the company, which is USC or LAPD, and then you've got the defendant, in essence, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're suing, it's a little different. But what I'm saying is that structure, now you've got LAPD with their interest, and then you've got a totally neutral arbiter looking at the evidence that's being presented. it's not a perfect system because there is no
Right.
perfect system.
Right.
But I just feel like inherently that would be a fairer system because the person who ultimately makes the decision has zero
Dog in the
interest.
fight. No.
No dog in the fight.
I remember when we, the city, voted for Measure M that changes the board member structure from the traditional 2 command staff officers to 1 civilian to 3 civilians, right? So now you have 3 civilians. Normally they're attorneys. Well, me, having gone to law school and wanted to be an attorney for my beloved LAPD, you put 5 attorneys in one room, you're probably not going to get much accomplished because everybody's one-upping each other, and there's just a lot of discussions going on, right? And there's a big egos going on. My thing has always been this: if somehow, some way, you can hire, let's just say, a very decorated command staff officer from like the state of Illinois, or maybe completely. I will even keep it in California. Let's just say it's someone from Northern California, and even another board member that's a rank and file, right? Someone that's very decorated. Maybe, I don't know, a SWATologist, and he's just firearms instructor, really sharp guy that's did a 30-year career, whatever, outside or inside Northern and Southern California. My point is that if you have board members that are completely detached from LAPD, our neighboring counties, it's not going to work because they know each other. But if you do, then there wouldn't be no ex parte. And there is that experience, right? Because I was a cop for 30 years. You're telling me about a DUI that happened off duty and we're trying to fire this guy? What's it, just your first offense? Shit, man, I remember I was in my agency. There was, really? Well, what's his character like? What's his reputation like? Or, to your point, okay, he lied. But what was his intentions of lying? Is he trying to cover up something morally?
Right.
Is this a mistake of the heart? You see what I'm saying? So, and having that experience of law enforcement, I think helps. Not to knock civilian oversight. I think civilian oversight is great. But I think if you have board members that are ex-law enforcement, I think it would help. What do you think?
So I agree with you. However, I would configure it a little differently.
Okay.
I think that having one retired law enforcement officer on the board is good for the very reasons that you mentioned, which is, again, they understand certain things within the culture. They understand that certain things are just not acceptable, irrespective of how a lawyer might look at it because they're looking at it purely legally.
Correct.
But I think, at least for me, I would love to see 2 attorneys and 1 former retired. And then you don't have 8 attorneys arguing and fighting, but you have 2 so that there's
a balance.
Because just because you're an attorney doesn't mean you get it right all
Right.
the time, right? I mean, again, they're fallible
there's some
too.
bad attorneys.
There's some bad attorneys. We've all worked with them. No offense.
No
but,
offense.
So I feel that if you have 2 attorneys who understand the idea of due process, the idea of evidentiary value,
Correct.
and direct evidence versus indirect evidence, because you would think that all coppers would know that, but not necessarily. And in addition to which, if you've been command staff for a very long time, then your area of expertise is personnel management, oversight, policies, and all of those things. But in terms of actually nitty-gritty investigative things, evidentiary, they may be too far removed because maybe the last time they actually did real police work, and I don't mean that in any kind of negative way.
I get you.
It's just a reality, may have been 25 years ago.
No, totally.
Versus attorneys, if they're trial attorneys, then that is their bread and butter.
Yeah. To the point, and I think we're kind of saying the same thing. Look, the border rights hearing process that LAPD has is, number one, it's unique. It's the only one in the country. And it's good. There's nothing, we can sit here and, kind of pick, what's good and what's bad. But in the end, it's fair. You get, at sometimes, and I can say that because I worked internal affairs. There's some good investigators. There's some really good board members who really take the time to make some, when they deliberate, to make some really good, sound decisions. And by the way, let's just make sure that the audience knows that we're not talking like the entire department. There was a point in time when I was in internal affairs as an advocate where we probably had maybe, and I'm highballing this, probably 100 border rights, right? Out of the 100 border rights, I want to say maybe half or a little over 50% were probably directed where the chief says, hey, you're facing some serious misconduct. My recommendation is removal, but this hearing determines your fate. And at the time, we probably had about 10,000 sworn officers. So let's just keep it real here. We're talking about a fraction of 0.0000001% of the population. But you know what? Everybody likes to hear about it, and it sells.
Right. But I will say this. I agree with you. But the key thing is that even for the 0.00001% of LAPD officers who are going to undergo this frightening process, right, of a border rights, I think the key, and again, circling back to where our conversation started, is that it's got to be done fairly so that it restores the faith in the system.
Yes.
So even though it's only 0.0001, but that 0.001 is going to disproportionately send out the message to the rest of the department, even though they may never go through a border rights, sending this image that the system is rigged or the process is rigged. And so that's why it is so important. Yeah. And really, it's no different than the public's view on policing, right? I mean, when you look at the issues or things that went wrong in either investigations or out in the street, again, it's 0.00001. But,
good point.
And of course, the media doesn't help.
No.
But we have our own internal media, which is called the locker room and the gossip. The gossiping that spreads.
And the IA guy, a police podcast.
Right, exactly. So the thing is, those fans get flamed, and so that is why it is so critical that in order for officers to have that faith that, okay, because you know what, look, bottom line is, I've never heard a cop say, well, let's protect bad cops.
Yes.
Not ever.
No.
Because it makes our jobs so much harder.
Correct. Yeah, if anything, it's like, you know what? I want that.
Yeah, get that guy.
Get that guy. I've also heard when I teach this internal affairs course with a Savage Training Group, is I hear, well, you only get the job because you're looking for your next promotion. That's a culture, true, accurate. And I teach up and down California. And the other thing too that I really that stands out the most, even it's that percentage, I just want the public to know, or I suppose the public and us, right? Us in law enforcement, is that, look, let's not make this out to be that we're these bad officers that are just running around everywhere in the department. The shittiest part about all this is that a big machine and a big agency like LAPD, you know this, you can have a serious complaint of misconduct in Devonshire, and someone from Southeast Division won't even know.
That's true.
Someone from we have 20 plus divisions, precincts, whatever you want to call them, right? But the shittiest part about all this is that when you're in a small agency, the minute you get an IA, everybody knows. And that impact, to your point, is that perception. We got to get it right, and we have to make sure that it's fair.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. That was that's some good clarity on my part. Now, before I forget, you did come on the job in 1994.
Yep.
Right. And I've asked some guests in the past how challenging it was to be a female police officer back then, meaning what was it like compared to what it is now? What do you think?
You know, it's really remarkable because when people talk about change in history, a span of, let's say, 20 or 30 years is nothing. It's like a nanosecond in terms of human history. And yet, in the 30-plus years that now my life has been LAPD has been part of my life, it is truly phenomenal of the huge changes culturally that I've seen as it relates to gender. I can't speak to race or anything because that's not, but I can speak to gender. So when I first came on, and I did my probation in Southwest, there were training officers who now when I think back probably had maybe 10 or 15 years on, which means that they were hired in the 70s. Okay, they made it very clear that they did not want women on the job. And the word was that you women, and they were very open about it, you are going to destroy policing and you're going to get people killed. And there were officers, I remember, where, because I was a boot, when I would pass them in the hallway, good morning, sir, or good afternoon, sir, depending on what watch I was on, and they would not acknowledge my presence. And it was just a really crappy feeling. Right? And there was a turning point in my career in Southwest. And where that happened was that it was PM Watch, and we got a radio call of a man with a gun who was threatening somebody at this location. It was a residential location. And just so that I can be brief here, but to make a very long story short, bunch of units, we got together, we formulated a tactical plan, we were going to make entry through the garage. They put me in the back and said, Toosbuy, you just hold the rear, right? It was clear to me that they did not want me up front. Anyway, I don't know what it was, but I had the wherewithal where I realized that they had forgotten to check around this one corner. So as they were looking at making entry, I actually went around the corner, defying really what I was told to do. I looked, and there was the suspect with the gun. What he was looking at was to come behind and ambush us that way.
Right.
And so I immediately verbally was like, drop down, drop the weapon, drop the weapon.
You held them at gunpoint,
really,
right.
Okay, and then they realized, the whole team that was looking at going in, is like, oh shit, this is going down the other way. And so they came and backed me, and anyway, we got him in custody, he dropped the gun, nobody was killed, blah, 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 blah. But we went back to the station, and my TO and a couple of other training officers, they're like, you freaking saved our lives. Like, who knows how that would have gone down? And I said, yeah, I know. He goes, well, what made you? And I said, well, we hadn't cleared that around that corner of the building.
Right.
You guys had somehow just zeroed in on going through that door. And from that moment on, I was treated like an equal.
Yeah, all it takes is one incident.
All it takes is one incident.
Yeah.
So I will say that even though there was a real bias towards women, the flip side is that once when you had proven yourself, then it didn't matter. The unfairness about that is I needed to prove myself because I was a woman, and maybe if you came in and you were, let's say, former Marine Recon, you didn't need to prove yourself.
Correct.
That was the imbalance, but I will say that at the end of the day, as I got off probation, those negative stereotypes weren't applied to me, but that wasn't to say they weren't applied towards other females.
As you sit here today and reflect on this, on your time when you were a boot, a probationer in Southwest. Sorry,
I had a good time there.
It's the South End, man. It's on and popping. But you left in 2018. Did it get better in terms of
a relation? Oh, for
imbalance.
That's where I started my answer was it's unbelievable to me. I mean, I don't feel that female officers or women are treated any differently than men. I think that if you come on as a boot and you're screwed up man or a screwed up woman.
That's my thinking.
And so that is kind of how it is now. It's like, are you squared away or are you not?
Yeah.
And that's really it. And I now see that there are male officers that their favorite partner in an ACAR is a female. Right? Like that they work really well together. Like when I came on, that just didn't exist unless there was a romantic intention. Then that's different, right?
Yeah.
That never happened. But all I'm saying is that, if a guy was asking to work with a female officer back then, it was because there was some sexual tension.
Yeah, of course.
But today I see male and female coppers who are just, they're partners. They're great partners together.
Yeah. And
that makes me very happy.
Yeah. And look, there is... I was always under the belief that you show up to a radio call of a rape investigation. I think the last person the victim's going to want to talk to is a male officer, considering the suspect is male. Any domestic mother issues, child issues. I mean, hey, what you think police work is, it's way more than what you think it is, and we're there to pretty much save you or protect you and to guide you and. We're just there for everything, and me personally, females play a vital role in law enforcement. So I thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you this. Worst incident in your career?
Well, speaking of Southwest, So even though I saw many horrible things throughout my career, but this one really had a huge impact on me. And I think in part maybe because it was one of my first. You know, it's always, they say the first time when something horrible. It was in Southwest, and it was a call of some abandoned children in a house. And it was actually a duplex. And we showed up, and there were 3 little kids ranging from the age of 2, I think 3.5, and then the oldest one may have been 5. There were no adults there. Whoever the mom was addicted back then it was crack, and so who knows where she was, but some neighbors had called, whatever. And there was human feces everywhere. There was no food in the fridge. I mean, the filth was unbelievable. The little boy had diaper burns from urine because his diaper hadn't been changed. And these kids had, I mean, they were malnourished. They looked like little walking skeletons. And they had so many injuries on them. And then you had, of course, the lack of hygiene and all of that. And there were rats in the place. And I just remember standing there, and it was my first time ever seeing that kind of human depravity. And because they were children, and I just remember at the time thinking, how are they not like screwed for life? Like, how do you bounce back from something like that?
Yeah.
You know, and so DCFS got called out, and, you know, obviously we booked the kids and all of that. And I just thought, wow. I mean, and now they're going to get separated, right? At least they had each other, their siblings, and God knows where they're going to end up. And at the time, I was a young patrol, I was a boot in patrol, so I didn't follow up on it. I was already just overwhelmed with the job, right?
Yeah.
But today, as a detective, I would have followed up and tried to figure out what happened to them and whatever. But to me, that just, to this day, I mean, I can picture the little boy in my mind, and that was just awful.
Yeah. Every time I ask this particular question, we always, go back to something that happened that not many people get to experience or share. So it comes with the job. It's not all TikTok. It's not all peaches and strawberries and unicorns. It's police work takes a toll on you. You're talking about an incident that happened close to almost 30 years ago.
More than 30 years
Yeah.
ago.
So yeah, for sure. Okay, talk to me. Where are we at today? I know you got some stuff going on.
A little bit.
Got your own little company. I know you do some science-based investigations. So what's it all about?
Yeah, science-based interviewing. I mean, when I was in LAPD, I was the lead instructor for interview and interrogation. And I worked on the curriculum for that, and I loved it. I love teaching. I love teaching cops especially, because I want to see cops be good at what we do. I want us to succeed, right? And so as an investigator, I think one of the biggest challenges is talking to people, particularly if you're working in a community or talking with a person who really doesn't want to give up any information. And it's not always suspects. There are victims who don't want to tell us stuff, right?
Yeah.
There are witnesses who don't want to tell us stuff. And so science-based interviewing is really the first huge transformational advancement and reform in interviewing and interrogation since the 1950s. Now, I want that to sink in. Think about the amount of reforms, tactically, street police work, has happened in the last 70 years. How we knock on a door, how we approach a car, how we respond to a 211 in progress, robbery in progress radio call. Back in the 50s, I'm sure cops just ran right in. Okay, we're going to go get the bad guy robbing. And what happened? Oh, people got killed. Yeah. Cops got killed. Yeah. Maybe we don't do it that way. Yeah. So think about how much thought goes into approaching a robbery in progress. I feel the parallels are the same in interviewing, in investigative interviewing, right? I think that the old method is, okay, you go in, you develop some rapport, but you don't really have a good idea what rapport is. You give him a cup of coffee, maybe a soda and water. You hope you can make nice by him. And then the moment he starts lying, what happens? We get pissed, we get frustrated, we now go up in his grill. Yeah. He shuts down, we give up, we walk out, and we tell our partner, well, that POS was never going to tell us anything anyway.
Yes.
And then who loses?
We do.
And the public.
Yeah.
So science-based interviewing is in the last 70 years, there's been leaps and bounds in studies into decision-making, the psychology of decision making. Why will somebody decide to say something or not say something, to confess or not confess? Okay, in terms of what is really rapport building and how to use evidence in a tactical way. So science-based interviewing is really much more tactical in terms of your approach on how to interview people, how to formulate questions, and in what order, in order to create an environment that they internally want to tell you what happened, as opposed to external pressures, which is yelling, threatening, saying you're going for, you're going to the electric chair. Those are external motivations to make somebody go, I don't know, maybe I did it, versus creating an internal, which makes our job as investigators and interviewers so much easier. So that's what I teach.
Awesome. And you got some classes coming up, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I got a class coming up next month in San Marino. I've got some classes out of state, and then back in California in May, up at Oxnard.
Okay, great. Thank you for showing up. Just this conversation that I haven't had with a fellow ORS alum, and I really appreciate that. I'll leave the floor up to you before we wrap it up. Any advice you have for anyone that wants to come on to become a police officer?
Yes, I think that, particularly when about everything that we've talked about today, is that I think that don't look at the recruitment posters, don't look at those pamphlets and videos, because they are not really an accurate depiction of what this job is. This job is very serious. It's a huge responsibility. There's a lot of boredom at times. That is just part of the job. Some people say police work is 90% boredom, 10% sheer terror. There's some truth to that. I think that if you are considering law enforcement, to recognize that it's about patience, about the process, fairness, and ultimately serving the public. And that is not always easy, and it is not gratifying. And I think one of the things that cops have a hard time with is that we think of ourselves as the good guys and we're the heroes and people should be thankful for what we do, and they should, but we're not entitled to it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the job can seem very unsatisfying and challenging, and it can bring you down. So you have to have a lot of mental fortitude to be prepared to do this job. But if you can and you do it right, I think it's one of the most gratifying careers you could ever pick.
Awesome. Thank you for showing up. Show me clear. And like always, please, please, please be safe out there. And don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.